Hi guys, I'm Kristen and thank you for joining me here at Studio Knit. I've been receiving a lot of requests to cover knitting charts. So these are the little graphs that you see that plot your stitches stitch by stitch using symbols. So let's just cover the basics so the next time you see a knitting chart you'll be able to interpret it with confidence. Let's start with knit stitch patterns that are just knits and purls. Now I have over 20 different textures and design combinations over on my website totally for free. They have both the written instructions for you as well as the knitting chart, and you're able to go back and forth between each and totally understand exactly how your pattern's going to knit up. Of course, I also have my knit stitch pattern book that is available for purchase. I'll have the link down below. And that way you can save it, have it on your mobile device, always available to you, totally ad-free, as well as be able to print it. So when you're binge watching television, you can just have a little piece of paper and tick off row by row as you're knitting up your swatch. I also just created a Pinterest board that is only knitting charts. So if there are some different designs that appeal to you that you'd like to save for later, head on over to that Pinterest board and save those designs that you'd like to knit up later. So let's go right into it. Let's go ahead and use my most recent knit stitch pattern. It is the diagonal chevron zigzag pattern. You guys really love it. I released it with the written knitting instructions that you've been knitting up this week, but I also have a chart. So let's use this as our example to look at a chart and totally understand all of the elements and exactly how to go about reading it. Your knitting chart is laid out in a grid and it has little cells. Think of it like an Excel document or graph paper. Each one of these little boxes represents one stitch on your needle. Stitch symbols are little drawings. They represent the knitting technique to use on each stitch of your pattern. So since we're doing a knits and purl pattern here in our zigzag pattern, you'll see that each box is filled with either a symbol for knit or purl. So let's look at the legend key. When you see a knitting chart, you'll first want to scan the legend key to make sure that it is a project you want to tackle. Today we're just doing knits and purls. So you'll see two symbols for knit on the right side and the wrong side, as well as purling on the right side and the wrong side. So which direction are we reading our knitting chart? We're actually starting right here, the bottom right corner. That might seem a little weird and random at first, but let's take a look at why it totally makes sense. After you've cast on your stitches, your very first stitch is right here on the right side of your needle. And of course, you are knitting from the bottom up because we're just using a flat piece of knitting here. So since we are working from the bottom up and we're starting on the right, that one little stitch right there, now it makes sense of why the swatch and the chart are matching up and you're starting at the bottom right. You'll see we have numbers here on our chart. Now on the right side, we have odd numbers. Over on the left side, we have even numbers, and those are also the rows, and those will be what you're knitting on the wrong side of your work. The top and bottom numbers, those are just there to help you with the stitch count. Knitting chart repeats. So some knitting charts, the entire chart will represent your entire piece of knitting, but sometimes there's repeats like this example right here. So it's just a knit and purl repeat. Because we've cast on 8 stitches, I have in this little highlighted box 8 stitches marked off, and then it's a full 16 rows of the repeat pattern. So it's going all the way up 16 rows here, and that's just showing you exactly where the repeat section is. The reason that I'm showing you even more than that is that it helps you understand the actual design of the pattern. So if you see that our little dots in the pattern are helping us understand it, and then we look over at our completed swatch, you'll see exactly how they match up. So let's review the right and wrong sides of your knitted work. I do have another video that goes a little bit more into detail about this, but let's go ahead and cover it because it is a big part of your chart. So the bottom right again, row 1, that is starting the right side, also known as the front of your work. And then when you come back around on row 2, you're knitting on the wrong side of your work. Now, some knit stitch patterns, the right and the wrong definitely look different, but some are reversible. So for example, this zigzag pattern is reversible, so it looks great on both sides. Lastly, the knit stitch symbol switch is what I like to call this. Let's take a look at that legend key again. So you'll see that on the right side of your work here on row 1, it's a knit stitch. It's just a blank white box. RS means right side, and all of the odd numbers are the right side. So every time there's a blank box, you're knitting, and then when there's a black dot, you're purling. But you'll see when we come back around on the even numbered side, we're knitting the wrong side of the work. So the symbol actually switches. So every time you see a dot, this time you're knitting, and every time you see a blank spot, that's when you're purling. So just make sure that you are aware of that if that's the case in the knitting chart that you're using. So I hope that today's overview on the basics of how to read a knitting chart has been really helpful to you, and the next time you encounter a chart in a knitting pattern that you are able to interpret it and read it with confidence. Thank you so much for joining me here. I do want to let you know that everything I covered is available in written form over on my website for free. So if there's just maybe one little bit that you need a refresher on, you don't have to watch this entire video again. Just hop on over to my website and scan and find the exact information that you need. So thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you next time. Bye guys!